A lot of heartache at the running back position after week 13. We've lost Christian McCaffrey. Good thing we held on to Jordan Mason. Now he's on IR too. So where does Isaac Guerrero rank in week 14? We're talking about it right now. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there today. Welcome to week 14, talking about some running back rankings in week 14. Isn't going to be an easy one for this position. Yes, we got some guys who are injured, but we also have some studs on bye. Guys like Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon. Now, because of that, the rankings may look a little bit different here this week. Now, before we dive into Tier 1, let's take a look at some of my bigger hits and misses from just last week. And let's go ahead and start off with the hits first. Guys like James Conner, DeAndre Swift, and Jonathan Taylor. Now for James Conner, I dropped him all the way down to RB20 in a tough matchup going up against Minnesota's defense last week. He finished as the RB25. DeAndre Swift, with all that pass-heavy play in Chicago now, I dropped him all the way down to RB25. He finished as the RB28. And then lastly, Jonathan Taylor. I barely had him up inside the top 15. Put him at the RB14. He finished as the RB13. But I did have some big-time misses as well. Guys like Bucky Irving, Najee Harris, and Rico Dowdle. Now for Bucky Irving, I love Bucky Irving. I put him at RB17 last week. I thought that would be high enough in a great game. I was not expecting the volume that he got last week. He finished as the overall RB1. How about Najee Harris? I have loved Najee all year long as a weekly mid to low end RB2, a safer, reliable play. Well, last week had the best game he's had all season, finished as the RB3. And then lastly, Rico Dowdle. You've all heard me rant on Dowdle before. He had a great game last week. I had him higher than I usually do, but nowhere near high enough. But now that we've gone through that, let's transition over to week 14, starting in Tier 1. And when we pull up Tier 1, we got the likes of Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, Devon Achane, Kyren Williams, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Chase Brown, and Bucky Irving. And I absolutely love seeing some new names up inside Tier 1 this late in the season. But let's go ahead and start it off with Saquon Barkley going up against Carolina. And it's funny how he has a game with 18 fantasy points last week, and a lot of people look at that as kind of a down week. That's crazy, but there is no way that the RB1 overall on the season, going against the team that allows the most fantasy points per game to the running back position, isn't going to be my RB1 on the week. Saquon staying at number 1. Number 2, it's Alvin Kamara going up against the Giants. The loss of Taysom Hill will only add to the workload of Alvin Kamara. Those carries that Taysom Hill would normally be stealing weekly are now going back to Alvin Kamara, as well as goal line touches. In a matchup going up against the Giants, they allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. Now after Kamara, we got Devon Achane going up against the Jets, and he continues to find the end zone weekly. He now has 7 touchdowns over his last 6 games, but he needs to keep getting them. He's only gone over 100 total yards one time in his last 4 games. Now the Jets are easier to run on than throw on, and Miami cannot afford to lose another game, so Devon Achane up here at number 3. Then we got Kyren Williams going up against Buffalo, coming off his lowest snap count of the season, and he didn't even touch the ball in the first quarter. He's now gone for over 12 fantasy points only one time in his last 12 games, but now he gets a matchup going up against Buffalo, who does allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the running back position, so fingers crossed heading into the fantasy playoffs here. Then we got Bijan Robinson going up against Minnesota, and he stayed hot after the bye. He's had at least 100 total yards in 6 of his last 7 games played. He's only scored less than 18 fantasy points one time over his last 7 games, but this is going to be his toughest test that he's had in quite a while. Minnesota allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position, and they have only allowed over 100 yards rushing 4 times all year to their opponents. How about Jahmyr Gibbs next going up against Green Bay? So let me get this straight. Monty came into the game last week less than 100%, and Gibbs is the one who ends up seeing a season low in touches. Now, he still had 104 yards on just 11 touches, and he's the overall RB4 on the year. But now they get a matchup going up against Green Bay, who allows just under the league average to the running back position. In their last meeting a couple weeks ago, Gibbs had 76 total yards and a touchdown. The ceiling remains high, so he stays in Tier 1. And then we got 2 newbies here in Tier 1. The first one, Chase Brown going up against Dallas. And at this point, he deserves to be here because he has faced some tough run defenses here as of late. Defenses like the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Baltimore Ravens. And he scored at least 17 fantasy points in all of those games. He's up to the RB 14 on the year, and now gets a matchup going up against Dallas, who allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. Welcome to Tier 1, Chase Brown. And then lastly, to round out Tier 1, we got Bucky Irving going up against Las Vegas. Dude put it all on the line last week and sacrificed his body at times, had a career high with 28 touches. Also a career high in total yards with 185, and he found the end zone as well. He now has touchdowns in 3 straight games. He's the clear leader in this backfield. He is banged up right now, currently questionable to play, so keep an eye on him because the Las Vegas defense, pretty average against opposing running backs. But man, I gotta say how much I love seeing Chase Brown and Bucky Irving this high. 2 guys that we talked about a lot this offseason. Hopefully a lot of you are benefiting from them. Now before we dive into Tier 2, I gotta shout out today's sponsor, Turtle Beach. And I've been talking about Turtle Beach for a couple weeks now, but I know there's some of you out there that are straight up procrastinators. You could have bought some Christmas gifts for people weeks ago and just been done with your Christmas shopping, but no, you've put it off. Well, it's already December, so you can't keep putting it off, and that's where Turtle Beach comes in. Now, Turtle Beach doesn't just have amazing headsets, they have every gaming accessory you could ever want, and they're all high quality at a price that does not break the bank. Everything from flight simulators, racing simulators, controllers, keyboards, mice, whatever it is you need, they got you covered. I actually got my son a Stealth 700 headset and he absolutely loves it. It's basically Bluetooth headphones. He's in there listening to music as he does homework half the time. So go out there and do a little bit of Christmas shopping at turtlebeach.com, but let's get it at a little bit of a discount. If you use code word headliners at checkout, you're going to get 10% off your entire order. That's 10% off your entire order at turtlebeach.com with promo code headliners. Links down below in the description. But all right, now we're moving on to Tier 2 running backs. And when we pull up Tier 2, we see the likes of Josh Jacobs, James Cook, David Montgomery, Isaac Guerrero, Aaron Jones, Tyrone Tracy, Tony Pollard, and Breece Hall. Now for Josh Jacobs, he's going up against Detroit, and he went from a safe, reliable RB2 every week to a solid RB1 over the last 6 weeks of the season. He's the current RB7 overall on the year, has had at least 100 total yards in 5 straight games, and at least 1 touchdown in 5 of his last 6 games played. He had 108 total yards against Detroit in their last meeting. Even though Detroit is a tough run defense, they do allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. Green Bay is a little bit banged up right now, and if they want to win this game, Josh Jacobs is going to have to run the football. How about James Cook going up against the Rams? He's coming off only his 3rd game of the year with over 100 total yards. He's had at least 1 touchdown, though, in 8 of his 11 games this season. My biggest concern when it comes to James Cook is him being rested at times to keep him fresh, since they've already clinched the division and a playoff berth. I'm just hoping in a game like this against the Rams, who allow the 9th most fantasy points per game to running backs, James Cook can get his early. How about David Montgomery going up against Green Bay? He came in less than 100% healthy last week and had his 2nd highest touch total that he's had all season long. It was also his 1st game with over 100 total yards since week 3. Now, he had 96 total yards against Green Bay earlier in the season, but Green Bay does allow less than the league average to opposing running backs. However, keeping David Montgomery in Tier 2. And the number 12, this is where I slotted Isaac Guerrero of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, he's got a matchup going up against Chicago, and congratulations if you held on to him or won the waiver wire sweepstakes. I'm actually a lot higher on Guerrero than a lot of people are. He's only had 1 game all year with over 10 touches. In that game, he had 102 total yards and a touchdown and was a top 12 running back on the week. It doesn't matter who it is. Running backs just produce in San Francisco. Look at the past. Guys like Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert. Before you even knew who they were producing in the backfield of San Francisco. Now he gets a matchup going up against Chicago, who allows the 10th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. I got Isaac Guerrero mid-tier 2 at RB12 overall. Now, after Grando, I got Aaron Jones going up against Atlanta, and he's about as up and down as it gets over the last month of the season. He's either had less than 45 total yards or over 100 total yards in every other game over the last month. Now, last week, he tied a season low in touches, and he just continues to fumble the football. Hold on to the ball, Aaron Jones, high and tight, my friend. But now he gets a matchup going up against Atlanta, who is a lot easier to throw on than run on. We're going to need some of that pass-catching upside from Aaron Jones once again this week. Then we got Tyrone Tracy going up against New Orleans, and man, I would love to see what this kid could do if he was on a team that actually had a lead every once in a while so they could actually focus on the run. Not like the Saints are absolutely stacked on offense, and they do allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to the running back position, so we could be looking at a good week once again from Tyrone Tracy. How about Tony Pollard going against Jacksonville? A battle to see which team sucks less. We may actually get some extra Pollard touches this week as well. He only had 12 last week, but it wasn't because of Tajay Spears. Spears himself only had 1 total touch. He's just a boomer bust type play, and matchup doesn't really matter when it comes to Tony Pollard. But obviously, this is a good matchup going up against Jacksonville, who allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game to the running back position. And then we round out tier 2 with Breece Hall going up against Miami. Now, he has not practiced at the time of this recording, and he hasn't been 100% healthy for weeks. He's really only had 1 good fantasy game since the week before Halloween. The Jets just don't have much to play for, and there's really no need in risking his injury any further. Now, in a matchup going up against Miami, it's not a bad one. They do allow the 11th most fantasy points per game to running backs, but is he limited at all? That's why I got him all the way down here to the bottom of tier 2. So, okay, now we're done with tier 2. Let's bring up tier 3, where we have James Conner, Rico Dowdle, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Pacheco, and Chuba Hubbard. Now, for James Conner, he's going up against Seattle, and between his bye week and his last 2 games played, he has been killing fantasy teams. Week 10 was the last time we saw him score over 10 fantasy points in a game. In his game against Seattle 2 weeks ago, he only had 7 carries for 8 damn yards. Seattle has allowed less than 90 yards rushing to their opponents in 3 of their last 4 games. This is not an easy one. That's why James Conner is the top of tier 3. Then we got Rico Dowdle going up against Cincinnati. Now, he's had back-to-back games with at least 22 touches, which definitely makes you fantasy startable for sure. That does not mean that you're going to produce weekly, though. Cincinnati is easier to throw on than run on, and if Joe Burrow can come out early, put some points up on the board, it's going to be hard for Dallas to run the football this week. Now, if Dallas can get a lead early, we're going to see so much Rico Dowdle just so they can keep the ball away from Joe Burrow. Kind of a risky start, but I've bumped him up to tier 3. How about Najee Harris going up against Cleveland? He just had his best fantasy day of the season. His first game over 20 fantasy points all year long. He has now had 20 plus touches though in 5 of his last 6 games. His game 2 weeks ago against Cleveland was his worst of the year though. Can we blame the snow in that? Maybe we should. Cleveland is just so much easier to throw on than run on, so Najee Harris is going to remain a low-end RB2 this week. Now, after Najee, we go down to DeAndre Swift, who's going up against San Francisco, and the change in offensive coordinator has really led to a pass-heavy offense in Chicago, and DeAndre Swift has been the guy who's taken the biggest hit. Since the change, he doesn't have over 75 total yards in a game or a touchdown yet. His volume has just been lower, but they were also tough matchups. You can't ignore that. He's gone up against Detroit and Minnesota. Now he gets a matchup going up against San Francisco, which is much better than those matchups because they allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So DeAndre Swift sitting right here at RB20. Then we have Kenneth Walker going against Arizona. He's currently questionable. He's a player we need to pay attention to this week, but he just continues to be a low-end RB2, and volume isn't the issue. He's averaging career lows in yards per carry and yards per reception. He needs massive volume because he only has 1 touchdown over his last 5 games played, and he's only gone over 100 total yards 1 time in his last 8. Now, the last time they met 2 weeks ago, he did have 93 total yards in that matchup. Then we move down to Isaiah Pacheco going up against the Chargers. He came back last week and had 49 yards on 8 touches. You have to think that he's going to be ramped up slowly. There is no need for them to rush him back. This is going to be close to a 50-50 split backfield with Kareem Hunt. Plus, we also can't look at last week and be like, hey, he had a great game. 34 of his 44 yards rushing came on just 1 play. which means his other 7 touches only resulted in 10 yards. So between splitting touches with Kareem Hunt and this tough matchup going up against the Chargers, who allow the 6th fewest fantasy points per game, Isaiah Pacheco's at 22. And then 23 is Chuba Hubbard going up against Philadelphia. And is Jonathan Brooks absolutely killing Chuba Hubbard? No. Not really. Chuba's still playing the same number of snaps. Now his volume is down. He just saw the lowest amount of touches he's seen since week 1. It was a tough game though. It's going to happen. This one though, going to be a little bit tougher going against Philadelphia. They allow the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and that'll round out tier 3 on to tier 4. In tier 4, we got Rachaad White, Nick Chubb, Jalen Warren, Zach Charbonnet, Travis Etienne, and Sincere McCormick. Now for Rachaad White, he's going up against Las Vegas, and last week was the first game without a touchdown for him in 5 weeks. His volume was similar. He averaged almost 7 yards a carry, which is great. He just didn't get much passing work, and he didn't score a touchdown. That's not going to happen every single week, though. He is still a decent flex option in good matchups. This matchup, iffy. Las Vegas allows right around the league average to opposing running backs, so that's why Rachaad White sitting at RB24, the top of tier 4 this week. Then we have Nick Chubb going up against Pittsburgh, and our boy is going to need them TDs once again this week against Pittsburgh. In 6 games, he hasn't had over 60 yards in a game, and he's averaging a career low 3 yards per carry. However, he had 2 touchdowns in that snow game 2 weeks ago, and he's going to need similar goal line looks this week against Pittsburgh if he's going to surprise our fantasy football teams. Then we have his opponent in that game, Jalen Warren, going up against Cleveland. He had half the touches in week 13 that he had in week 12, yet still finished with the same amount of yardage. But he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns either. He only has 1 on the season, but that touchdown came against Cleveland 2 weeks ago. With the volume that Najee is getting, though, it's hard for Jalen Warren to be anything more than an RB3 in tough matchups. Then we move down to Zach Charbonnet going up against Arizona. And really the only thing you can hope for from him is a touchdown, because if he doesn't see it, he hasn't been getting enough volume to rely upon. However, Kenneth Walker is currently questionable, and there's a chance that he does not play this week. If that happens, if Kenneth Walker is ruled out in this game against Arizona, Zach Charbonnet is going to shoot up somewhere up inside the top 15 to 20 running backs. Then we got Travis Etienne going up against Tennessee. And how crazy is it that Travis Etienne doesn't have a game this year with more than 85 total yards and has no touchdowns since week 2? Now, Tennessee is a pretty average defense against running backs, but in this split backfield with Tank Bigsby and now Mac Jones under center playing quarterback, it's really hard to get excited, like we used to anyway, about Travis Etienne. And then we round out tier 4 with Sincere McCormick. And a lot of you are saying, who the hell is Sincere McCormick? Well, he's going up against Tampa Bay, and there's only been 1 running back all year long to have 60 yards rushing against the Chiefs, the number 1 rushing defense in the NFL. That 1 running back was Sincere McCormick last week. That's it. He's the only name on the list. Now, because of that, he could have earned a chance in this backfield that's currently banged up. Alexander Madison and Zamir White, both questionable to still even play in this ballgame, and they haven't played the last couple of weeks. Now, Tampa Bay is a much better matchup than Kansas City. It's a dice roll, but if you're looking for a Week 14 lottery ticket, it could be Sincere McCormick. Which means all we have left is tier 5, and full disclosure, this is where the fall off happens and things get ugly quick. In this tier, we got the likes of Jerome Ford, Ray Davis, Gus Edwards, Kareem Hunt, Jonathan Brooks, Tank Bigsby, and Amir Abdullah. Now for Jerome Ford, he's going up against Pittsburgh, and he does well when he touches the football, but he barely touches the football. He's getting between 5 to 10 touches a game, and Nick Chubb is dominating the goal line. Ray Davis, he's going up against the Rams, and with Buffalo clinching, maybe we see a little bit more Ray Davis to keep James Cook fresh. Then we got Gus Edwards going up against Kansas City, and I don't really understand the Chargers. J.K. Dobbins goes down, and the Chargers just stop running the ball altogether. Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal totaled for only 10 carries between them last week. Now they get the number 1 rushing defense in the NFL. That sounds pretty gross. Then we got Kareem Hunt going against the Chargers. Obviously, he's in a 50-50 split backfield with Isaiah Pacheco, and that's going to hurt, especially in tough matchups like this. This week is nothing more than a lower-end flex play that's highly touchdown dependent. Then we got Jonathan Brooks going up against Philadelphia. I expect his snaps to increase weekly, but this is no easy matchup, and if they fall behind early, they're not going to be able to run the football. How about Tank Bigsby going up against Tennessee? Now, splitting touches on a good offensive team is bad enough. Doing it on a team that isn't good and doesn't score much is an absolute nightmare. And then lastly, Amir Abdullah going up against Tampa Bay. The matchup isn't horrible, but if I was going to risk it with a running back in Las Vegas, it's going to be Sincere McCormick, and I'm just going to hope for the upside. We've seen Amir Abdullah. It's not bad, but it's not great either. But if Las Vegas does fall behind early, maybe Abdullah gets some passing work. All right, so there you have my quick and dirty top 36 running backs here for Week 14 fantasy football. I know the fantasy playoffs are right around the corner, and we got to make it through our last Buy-Mageddon of 2024. Now, if you enjoyed today's show, do me a favor by hitting the like button if you haven't already. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.